Thank you all for joining us today for another episode of our podcast, Moving to Value Unscripted. My name is Dr. John Rodas, and I'm a recovering ex-hospital president and am proud to be the president of the Moving to Value Alliance. The Moving to Value Alliance, MTVA, a 501c3 nonprofit, is a multi-stakeholder grassroots organization whose purpose, put simply, is to foster a community that aims to create a value-based healthcare ecosystem with high-quality outcomes at a reasonable cost for plan sponsors and their members, beneficiaries, or employees. Our community has grown substantially over the past few years. We started in Connecticut, but now have nearly 1,000 stakeholders from more than 40 states all over the U.S. I want to thank our members who make this presentation possible. We'd like to give special recognition today to our trade member, Quantum Health. We're joined today by my fellow board member, Dr. Steve Schutzer, and Executive Director of MTVA, Laura Watson. Dr. Schutzer, a nationally renowned arthroplasty surgeon, is one of the founders of MTVA and is the co-founder and president of Upswing Health. Laura has a journalism background with experience reporting on healthcare, antitrust, and regulatory news. Our special guest today is a trailblazer in the field of population health, Dr. David Nash. Dr. Nash was the founding dean for the Jefferson College of Population Health, the first college of population health in America. He's been a full-time faculty member at Jefferson for 35 years, currently serving as the Dr. Raymond C. and Doris N. Grandin Professor of Health Policy. Dr. Nash is well known for his work on the public reporting of outcomes and quality of care improvement. He's a board-certified internist and has earned an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's chaired the Technical Advisory Group of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Cost Containment Council for more than 25 years and is also principal faculty member for Quality of Care Programming with the American Association for Physician Leadership. Dr. Nash has authored over 100 peer-reviewed articles and has written and edited many books, including his most recent bestseller, How COVID Crashed the System, A Guide to Fixing American Healthcare. He is currently editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Medical Quality and Population Health Management. We're excited to have Dr. Nash with us today to serve his experience advancing population health and discuss the role of quality, safety, transparency, and outcomes in the movement to value. Welcome to Moving to Value Unscripted, Dr. Nash.
Thanks. Great to be here. And thanks so much for the introduction, too. Listen, my grown children think I'm a dinosaur, so just warn your listeners. They hear growling and, leaves rustling. I'm just eating. That's all. So don't worry.
Make sure the kids listen to the podcast.
Exactly.
So, David, thank you so much for joining us today. I have to say, I want to hear a little bit about and I know our listeners would be interested in your journey to how you got to where you are today, and particularly the early part of your career to how you got to be the founding dean of the School of Population Health. But you have to, as you alluded to in your book, you have to promise to include the part about the influence your dad had on you in writing that letter to Jefferson. So I don't want to give it away because I want our listeners to hear from your mouth. So go ahead, my friend.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you again for the invitation. Really wonderful to be here. I'm very appreciative, and best of luck with MTVA. I mean, you guys are on the cutting edge of an important movement. You're contributing to the conversation. I hope you're converting the vast unwashed who still think that private practice fee-for-service is the way to go. And after the most recent election, who knows where we're going to go. So hang in there and keep up the good work. I think that's really, really important. Well, look, it's true. I've been a faculty member at Jefferson in Philadelphia. January now will be my 35th anniversary. Look, no one is going to repeat that anytime soon, and that's probably for the best. No one is going to stay in one place, in one job in the future for more than 3 decades. I get it. And academic medicine has completely changed its culture in the last 3 decades, and maybe we can chat a little bit about that. But my journey is, it's kind of a fun story. I grew up in what we refer to in the book as a gilded ghetto on the South Shore of Long Island, New York, and I'm being very careful not to have my Long
Island. Long Island, you mean? Yeah, we know. It's all right.
As a lot of young people in that era, and we're talking about the early 1960s, it was a different time and a different place. Growing up on the South Shore of Long Island in that era, America was the world leader. We were taught patriotism. It was a completely different time and space. We were also taught in many households that the most important achievement is education. And so my younger brother, my only sibling, and I, we totally drank the Kool-Aid, as did most of our neighbors. I went to a big public high school, which is still ranked as one of the top public high schools in the state of New York, where basically our graduating class had like 650 kids in it, and 600 of them went to four-year colleges. I mean, you get the idea. But I think my journey was a little bit different. I was really influenced by my late father, who was a businessman, and my mother was a school teacher. And as we describe in the book, the apocryphal story is I was thinking about going to medical school even at age 17, like many of my peers. So it was not anything out of the ordinary. But I was interested even back then in combining what I thought was business with medicine. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. And as it turned out, a very famous physician, Samuel P. Martin III, who had already established the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics on the Wharton campus at Penn in Philadelphia, he already was a major national leader. I, of course, had never heard of him as a high school kid. But lo and behold, Sam Martin was heavily quoted in a New York Times article about the doctor of the future and what he or she, what were the skills they would need. And I read this article and I said, wow, this guy, I mean, he's doing what I would like to do. And, you know, when you're 17, you think, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And I did share it with my dad, and he said, well, why don't you write Dr. Morton a letter? Now, just for our listeners, let me remind everybody this is 1972. So there's no email or cell phones. I mean, you get the idea. So I thought, oh, Dad, that's a ridiculous, stupid thing. Why would I write Dr. Martin a letter? He said he doesn't want to listen to a high school kid. And then 2 days later, I wrote Dr. Martin a letter after screaming at my father. I clacked away on my Smith Corona, sent it to Dr. Martin, and that son of a bitch called me at home on Long Island. Apparently, you know, is David Nash available? So
Wow.
I mean, you know, you could just imagine.
Wow.
And I answered, and he had a deep baritone Midwestern twang. And essentially, he said, look, whoever you are, you've got moxie to write me a letter. Get on a goddamn train and come and meet me. And I said, oh my God, okay. And
What did I get into?
right, just like that television ad, I hung up and then I said to my father, how do you get to Philadelphia? So several weeks later, communicating then with his secretary. Anyway, got on a train, Long Island Railroad, Amtrak to Philadelphia. Somehow I made it to his office on campus by myself. And I mean, he became a central figure. It's not an exaggeration. He became a central figure in my life and declared himself as my mentor. I didn't even know what the word mentor meant. And as it turned out, I was just one. I mean, I was not super special because Sam, at that point in his career, he had been a decorated World War II member of the OSS. His exploits are still sort of secret. Then he became a med school dean. And then he convinced the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in Princeton to fund the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program. I didn't know any of this when I met the guy. You couldn't Google Dr. Martin, hello, right? So I just showed up as a wide-eyed kid. And as it turns out, Sam had a habit of doing exactly what he did with me. Now, maybe not with high school kids, but with college students on the Penn campus and others from around the country. So I became one of a number of people in the Sam Martin orbit. And then he helped me decide, you know, what college and what to major in. And I mean, it was an 8-year journey going through college and medical school. And he was central in my decision to go to Rochester for medicine. Anyway, at the end of medical school. It then came time, of course, to, where was I going to train? I was already married in medical school. That's another crazy story. But Sam Martin guided Esther Nash and me to Philadelphia so I could be close to him during internship and residency. And to summarize this hoot of a story, I was accepted into the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program as a second-year resident in medicine at a Penn affiliate called the Graduate Hospital, which was a great place to train. And Esther and I trained together, but I knew that I had a fellowship spot as a second-year resident, which is, pretty
Yeah.
remarkable.
Cool.
And remember also back then, I mean, I'm so old, there was no couples match.
There was no match, actually. It was
Right. I
yeah.
mean, we filled the form out on parchment. Let's not forget, right? So, Esther and I matched outside of the match. There was no couples match. We signed an agreement with the Graduate Hospital. We were very grateful to be able to know in December of senior year, so months before March, that we were going to Philadelphia and would be house officers together. So
Wow.
the summary is Sam was way ahead of his time. The whole notion of the physician leader. I mean, here we are, 35, 40 years later, and we're still talking about the need, like you, John, and you, Steve, for physician leadership, right? So I've spent a good part of my 35-year career helping, I hope, to train physician leaders. And this is all, I put this all at Sam's feet.
Yeah,
He
great.
he articulated this in an era when, healthcare was 8%, 9% of the GDP, but he was a prescient guy. He could look into the future. He knew where we were headed. And he said, holy moly, we need doctor leaders who are going to participate. Otherwise, if we don't and we abrogate our leadership responsibilities, well, then we'll get what we deserve. And I mean, we could spend 2 hours on this question alone, but that's the early part of my journey. And I hope listeners are interested. I mean, the message today for me is I tell current students in our own college and at Sidney Kimmel Medical College, I have lots of mentees. When you've been on campus for 3 decades, I mean, I am blessed that some of my mentees are in major leadership positions in hospitals, in big pharma, in managed care. I mean, my legacy, which is really important to me personally, is not the awards or the books. No one gives a damn. It's the people.
Right.
And when you finish the clinical scholars program, and then I'll shut up here, Sam provided a Burt Bacharach photo of himself. I mean, this takes I put this in the category of that's chutzpah.
Burt Bacharach.
Right.
For
And,
the current listeners, that would be Beyonce or Taylor Swift. But yeah, we
right.
get
I mean, this takes chutzpah to give everybody a self-portrait, but he only had one wish, which is corny but incredible. Put my picture in your office wherever you are, and I want you to pay it forward every freaking day.
Yeah, that's great.
And I
Great
thought,
message.
damn, what a great idea. So that picture is still in my office at Jefferson. People, over the years, who's this old guy? And it always engenders a great conversation. So I'm paying homage to Sam, along with hundreds of, not just David, hundreds of other people who he influenced. And it's all about paying it forward. And, I think we could get into it, but in the modern era, finding mentors, and especially finding mentors for women in medicine, which is another whole story. Finding mentors is a hard job, and being a good mentor is a commitment. I mean, this is something that Sam knew in 1985, 86, 87. He was creating a cadre of future leaders who had his level of commitment to mentorship. And I think in medicine, we've missed that a lot. It sounds corny. I get it. But mentorship saved me. I mean, it directed me. It produced what I was, it aided me in every way possible.
The amazing thing was that he had that ability to see,
Yeah,
between the lines and
right.
identify that talent. That was clearly the key.
I think Dave Sam obviously made the right decision on a young fellow at age 17. He obviously saw something in you. And, John, your introduction of David was brief. You could have gone on for 45 minutes. We've met some impressive people, David, and I don't want to blow too much, but your influence and your impact on so many different spheres and academics and public space and outcomes measurement and entrepreneurial and venture capital, it just goes on and on and on. And we could have a podcast, John and Laura, for any one of those.
Right. Absolutely.
So I guess what piqued my interest, I think of you largely as an academic. And the academic folks that John and I have hooked up with, mostly at Porter and Kaplan, because they're 90 miles away. We went to their courses. They actually kind of adopted John and I as their disciples because we were
Right.
doing some really cool things. We drank the Kool-Aid, outcomes over cost. But they've also been criticized, and Professor Teisberg, and because they're in the ivory tower, right? They
Sure.
don't know what it's like on the street,
Right.
right? And they had all these principles and all this research, but you've been able to take these principles and actually deploy them. How do you do that? Am I right on that?
Yeah, well, thank you for the observation. I think of myself, I mean, I guess in the retrospectoscope, I've been an educational entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is, Wharton gave me the vocabulary, Steve and John, to better understand what the hell it was we were doing. Let me tell you two stories that will clarify this. So when Esther and I were house officers, way back in the days of the Giants, and we were interns when Libby Zion died in New York, just to give our listeners
Yeah.
some context here. I found that, we were admitting and discharging the same people who were going to be back the following week. And that's because they were poor. They had no resources. It was ridiculous. We would give them prescriptions that they could never fill. They would go back to a house infested with rats and have no heat in the winter. And, we didn't really understand any of that. And I thought, what are we doing here? Yeah, just it started by the time I was a second year resident and had been accepted into the program. I started to look at things. I thought, I'm losing my mind with this, but I got to do it because if I don't, I'm not going to graduate. I won't get board certified. So, okay, heads down. We finish residency. I get to Wharton. Within the first semester, I thought, okay, I have the vocabulary to help explain what just happened in the
Right.
last 3 years of residency. And that helped me. And then when I got to Jefferson in 1990, the dean at that time, who is still alive, unbelievable, Dr. Joe Ganella, he had already been one of the longest serving med school deans in the country in 1990, 17 years at the helm at Jefferson Medical College. And he was super old fashioned, had a thick Italian accent, very old school, never wrote a note, did everything on the phone. Anyway, as it turned out, he wanted me to come to Jefferson, 20 blocks east of where I was on the Penn campus, because I was the only doctor who had been to business school. I mean, Steve, can you imagine that today? And
Wow.
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
when I got there, I said, well, this is what they want me to do. I'm going to connect to the private sector. I'm going to raise money, not from NIH, but I'll raise money from whoever will give it to me. And I'll hire people who have an entrepreneurial perspective on what it is we're doing here. And I'll connect with outsiders who know a lot about our industry, and I'll try to do it maybe in a non-traditional way. And so I credit Wharton with giving me the confidence and the vocabulary. And then I credit Jefferson with they really didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, in retrospect, they took a huge risk. Who is this kid? I was in my early 30s. Who is this kid? Yeah, he went to business school, great. And it was not easy the first, I would say, 5 years, 1990 to 95, proselytizing about, hey, gang, we have to have some control over who orders which antibiotic. I mean, basic stuff. We should agree on a guideline to treat heart failure. This is 1993 and 4. Well, you would have thought that I used four-letter words at Grand Rounds. That who is this? What is he talking about? Get this kid off the stage. On the other hand, the hospital leadership, they paid more attention to what I was saying than the medical school. And slowly, slowly, it took 13 years from 1990 to 2003 when my Office of Health Policy became a bona fide med school department of health policy. So it was a 13-year journey to convince the status quo that this is bona fide work, that we need experts to help the medical staff become more efficient, improve quality, do the right thing. I mean, I'm summarizing. And I was very lucky because there was a movement afoot, right? To Err is Human was published in 1999. That was a watershed event for me because it gave credence to stuff that I was talking about for the previous 9 years on our campus that nobody really believed me. And, I get it. Why would they? Until that book. And then 2 years later, Crossing the Quality Chasm, all of a sudden, all the nonsense that Nash was talking about, hey, he must know something because the Institute of Medicine, just published 2 tremendous books. So it's a long-winded answer to your great question, Steve, but I looked everywhere outside of the 4 walls of Jefferson at that time to find support from people and institutions who would give us money to do the work. Yeah. And luckily, in those days, there were plenty of people who were interested.
Fantastic.
Laura?
Yeah, I know we kind of have gotten through some parts of your background, the earlier years, but I want to hear a little bit about how you started the first College of Population Health in the U.S. and, kind of what the journey of founding that field.
Sure. Great. It's a great question. And of course, like lots of things in life, it's, 80+% being at the right place in the right time, 20%, being aware that you got to grab the opportunity when it comes. So just to pick up on where we were, by 2003, Jefferson Medical School faculty, the chairs, voted unanimously to approve creating a new Department of Health Policy. So let's go back in time. In 2003, there were roughly 100 med schools, maybe 110, and fewer than a fifth of them had a non-clinical department devoted to research and health policy. So great. 2005, 6, 7, somewhere in there, Jefferson University, which was only 4 schools and a handful of hospitals and, fewer than 2,000 students on our campus. We got a new university president, a very famous guy, Robert Barchi, MD, PhD. He was the provost at the University of Pennsylvania. So let me just make the connection here. So being a provost in a giant Ivy League university, he goes 20 blocks east to become the president of Jefferson. So he took one look around and said, what is this parochial place and who are these people? And luckily, he took a shine to me because I had a Wharton degree, right? So it's something he could recognize. All right. So like all university presidents, the very quick story, we got to have a strategic plan. He recruits a lot of faculty. Nothing special about David. I was one of hundreds of faculty, but I got to chair, along with another colleague, one aspect of the plan, which was charged by the board. The board at that time said, we've got to expand the university. Okay, and the board said specifically, we want to build 2 new schools, a College of Pharmacy and a to be determined. Go do research on these 2 things. Okay, so a lot of faculty time and energy. I was a co-chair of the to be determined. And the long and the short of it is, this was before Obamacare, because that was March of 2010. All this work was going on in 2007. And so I got a phone call from President Porci, and just let our listeners understand, when you're a med school department chair and the president of the university calls you, something's not right. Right?
You think you're in big trouble.
Right. Let me just remind our listeners, the dean is my boss, not the president. So I said to my secretary, what the hell does Dr. Barchi want? And we don't know. There's no agenda, but he needs to see you. I thought, well, I've had a great run here.
That's what I would think.
Right. And I had already gotten tenure. So it's really important for our listeners. By 2004, I was on that Dr. Raymond C. and Doris N. Grandin endowed chair. So I've been on campus 14 years. So I was a tenured full professor already. Okay. So what does the president want with me? So the short story is at a fateful meeting in his office, he said, I appreciate all the work you've done, yada, yada. You're going to be the new dean of the to be determined school.
Wow.
You only have one or two meetings at work like this in your whole career. And I said, well, Bob, I don't know. It was fun doing the strategic plan. I'm a med school department chair. I'm really thrilled to be doing what I'm doing, and I have a plan. He said, no, you don't understand. You have 10 minutes to decide while we're sitting here whether you're going to take this job or not. And if you don't take it, I will abolish your department and put it in this new school, and you will be out of a job. Or,
Ouch.
words to that effect. So my somewhat flippant answer to his rather difficult job offer was, well, I guess that's my recruiting package, huh? And I said, okay, I'm your man. And we shook hands. I walk out of his office and I walked back to my office, literally across the street. And my secretary, who had been with me the entire 14 years, she looked at me. She said, what's wrong? You look terrible. And I said, I'm not sure what I just agreed to, but I got to call my wife. So I called Esther at her office and I said, I've agreed to be the dean. She said, what did you do? You didn't bargain. What? So with that vote of confidence, honestly, that's the story. I wish I could say, wow, we had this great idea. Now, look, the thinking did go into the strategic plan. We did come up with some cool ideas. We did say that we needed to go beyond public health and start thinking about the two things I cared about, the quality and safety of the care delivered, the cost, the outcome, that we need some kind of a school that's going to deal with all of this stuff. And so there was a struggle to come up with a name. I won't even tell you the cumbersome names that we started with. And then it is the truth. I know people won't believe it, but within several weeks of that fateful announcement, and then Dr. Barchi told the whole campus, David is going to be the new dean. Oh my God. And then I got a phone call from Dr. Barchi's wife, Frances. I know. And she said, there's a lot of clamor. Here's the name of the new school. It's going to be called the School of Population Health. Are you good with that? I said, Mrs. Barchi, that's
Wow.
great. And hung
That's
up.
great.
And then I had to go tell the faculty, guess what? We have our name. What? You're dictating what we're doing. I said, no, I'm not. The president's wife called me, and this is
Yeah.
what we're going to do. Anybody disagree, they're free to leave. And that's where we got the
That's
name.
great. Wow.
And so, wow. But if you look at the research evidence, let's go back. So David Kindig, Kindig, still alive, working at University of Wisconsin, former hospital president, super smart guy. He wrote a paper in 2003 in the American Journal of Public Health. And in that paper in 2003, remember this is 2008, 5 years prior, he came up with the term population health. I did not come up with it. I popularized it. And to Steve's prior point, I operationalized it. So we all decided we're going to call this the college. Well, it was school, but then the College of Population Health. All right, that's great. Was only small problem. What the hell does that mean?
All right. That was going to be my question.
So it's 2008. The board expected a presentation in the summer of 2009, so we worked for a year, slide deck, which I still have. The board unanimously approved it in June of 2009. We opened the doors in September of 2009. And then in March of the following year, right, March of 2010, Obamacare. Now we're off to the races. So after March of 2010, I had much less explaining to do. because if you remember, the legislation's all filled with the notion of the population, accountable care organizations. People forget the history. I didn't make this stuff up. It was handed to us, in a tight vote. Obama was lucky to get it through, and he knew it. The Senate and Congress barely passed the damn thing. And as former Vice President Biden said, this is a big, effing deal.
Yeah.
Right? And he was right. And so then we were off to the races in a much more earnest way. And the college was not designed for undergraduates. I mean, it was focused on mid-career individuals who mostly online in 2010, 11, and 12 would work with us online to get master's degrees in areas that people hadn't thought about before, like quality and safety, health economics, eventually population health. Oh, and inside the school was a totally accredited public health program as well, because public health was still the central pillar of what we were doing. We added all this other stuff to it. So let me summarize. I mean, I wish I could say to the audience that, yeah, wow, I woke up, I had a eureka moment like Archimedes, and we're going to build a school of population health, and it was a divine intervention. None of that stuff. I was in the right place at the right time. I had a big mouth. I was very outspoken that we need to do something. So here's the real story. At around that same time as the announcement was made that I was going to be the new dean, and then all of us, the supporters lined up and the detractors also lined up. I was teaching a senior medical student seminar. So there must have been 20 kids in the room, all Jefferson Medical College now, Sidney Kimmel Medical College seniors. And it had just been announced that I'm going to be the dean, and, great. And a student, before we get started, says to me, Dr. Nash, I have a question. I said, sure, what is it? He said, well, I read the news that you're going to be the dean of this new school. That sounds interesting. Do you think they did this to get you out of the medical school to shut you up?
Oh, man.
And I had one of those.
Hadn't thought of that.
And, out of the mouths of babes. Right. And it was a guy. And what was really interesting to our listeners, all the other students were looking how deep under the table could they hide, because they figured, who is this kid asking this dean? Unbelievable. So, of course, millennials, they have no guardrails and authority. What's that? So this kid asked me actually a freaking fantastic question. It took my breath away. And I answered and I said, well, you might be right. And now let's get on with what we're doing here today. And everybody took a deep breath because I didn't lose my temper. Actually, he blew me away. And then I started to ask people, what do you think of this? And a lot of people said, oh my God, what a prescient kid. And so, great. Out of the med school I went and into a brand new venture that I was assigned to lead. And I thought, this is amazing. But good to have Dr. and Mrs. Grandin, who of course were still alive at the time, and have their support. The dean still supported it. But I'm summarizing. I mean, it was a academic risk, no question. I had no idea how to be a dean, so I had to hire people to help me to be a dean. And going from med school department chair to dean, well, of course, there's no training, no help, no mentoring. In the corporate world, when you hire a new CEO, as just a brief analogy, there's all kinds of coaching available and they're at your side for weeks. I had none of that. They said, yeah, great. You're now the dean. Good luck. And so I thought, shoot, I got to figure out how to do this. So I surrounded myself with super smart people who had been provosts and deans, and I had no idea how to do this, hello. It was a baptism by fire. And being a dean is not the same as being a med school department chair. You're responsible for everything, not to mention all the student-related stuff. Let's just take a moment. FERPA, FLMA, financial aid, admissions, crazy behavior in the classroom, even online. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I had no idea how to do any of that. But I found people who mostly did. And we had a rough start. I mean, the university had unrealistic expectations about enrollment, number one. And number two, of course, which in retrospect, I should have really understood. They gave us a lean budget is being generous, an unrealistic budget. And I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't make sufficient demands. I was way too accepting. I avoided conflict. I mean, in retrospect, I should have been much more outspoken about
Should
it.
have had Esther. You should have had Esther
I
helping
should
you
have had
more.
Esther. Yes, I was way too nice because I figured, well, I'll get more done if I'm nice, and that's mostly true. But it was pretty clear 3, 4 years into it that we were underfunded. And then that required, back to Steve's prior question, I had to go back to the private sector and say, you need to give me money. Johnson & Johnson sent 12 students. That helped our enrollment. We started the population health colloquium, raised money, filled the exhibit hall. I went and I twisted arms to the breaking point to find money to keep the thing afloat.
Right.
And every speech I gave, every check went to Jefferson. I mean, I sadly exhausted myself to replace the monies that the university did not supply. Right. So, that's a hard thing to admit. And I wasn't home a lot, which is difficult. I did my best to keep the ship afloat. And it was, in retrospect, a model that was, a rickety ship that was springing leaks all the time. But it stayed afloat long enough. And also, being the first school, well, that's kind of interesting, but it's better to not be the only school, right? So I tried to help other places that were building colleges and schools and departments of population. I spent a lot of time pro bono helping everybody else because I figured it raises all boats if there's more than one school. One school's an experiment. 5 schools is a movement.
Yeah, great point.
Big difference. Get these other schools off the ground as fast as possible. Then the other challenge, just to Laura, after we opened the doors, we didn't have any legitimacy. So where's the textbook on population health? Well, guess what? In 2009, you could go back and look on Amazon.
There wasn't one.
Oh, there's not a single damn book. Well, how can you have a school without a textbook? Holy crap. So we had to, get a textbook together. It's now we're working on the 5th edition. It's a bestseller. And is it the greatest book ever written? Certainly not, but it was the first. And so it has a following. And similarly for our journal, Population Health Management, I mean, we just had our 25th anniversary last year. So, again, we had to legitimize and operationalize what we were trying to do here. And that's where we are. Yeah.
Wow. Quite an amazing story. So David, let me ask you though, so the School of Population Health, to your point, took you out of the medical school, right?
That's
into
right.
this new graduate school program,
right?
As you pointed out, largely online. And I guess my question to you is, and believe me, I get the public health policy component of population health, which I'm a strong advocate for, and we don't do enough in that space for sure. And we can spend the whole rest of the talk about that. But let's get back into the medical school curriculum.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, population health is about individuals within the population and the role of the physician in modifying those people's behavior, nudging them to do the right thing, identifying those things you've alluded to, and avoiding then the chronic disease that's going to come later in life. I mean, that's a big part of it, right? How do we get what you're doing at that in the graduate school level into the medical school classroom? And are
So
we doing enough of that today in this?
this is a great question, and you're taking my breath away for our listeners. Yes, I mean, among my disappointments looking back was our inability, not just mine, but to influence both UME and GME as it relates to population health. Let me translate. So our focus was on mid-career individuals coming online and some in person to get a new skill set to become leaders in this field. Uh, we were hoping that it would become more of a cornerstone of the UME, especially UME curriculum. I would give us a B minus, maybe a C plus, a B minus on achieving that goal. And that's a much more complex question related to what motivates medical schools, and we could get into it. And medical schools come in, three flavors: top third, mid third, bottom third. And there's about 40 schools in each of these categories now. And sadly, population health is not at the top of their agenda. Not for everybody, but for the leading innovative schools, it's the cornerstone of where they perceive, and I would agree, where the world is going. And we could name names and prefer not to, but I think we didn't have the kind of influence on UME that I had hoped. Yes. We had collaborators, mostly in the Department of Family Medicine, and it's not like there was nothing. But even when Sidney Kimmel Medical College adopted some of the tenets of pop health in their curriculum, they did not use our textbook. And so, okay, I guess I still have a little bit of a burr in the saddle from that one. And, a lot of these folks are gone now, but it is sadly true that even at that time, we had the college, we had the faculty, we had the damn book, and literally in the building next door, they weren't using the textbook in their day-to-day teaching. And so you get it. Okay. Boy, that telegraphed something. Maybe that med student was right, and they just wanted my butt out of their hair. And, great. I get it. Not shedding any tears about that any longer, for sure not.
David, can I just ask, because I'm don't have any experience in medical school. Can you
Yeah.
what is UME and GME?
Yeah, sorry. Undergraduate medical education, the first 4 years of med school, and GME is the training, internship, residency, fellowship. So the jargon we use is UME and GME. UME is basically the 4 years of med school, and GME is anything after that. The good news is that now, as a good example, I'm on the board of directors of the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine in little old Scranton, Pennsylvania. And they're innovating. I'm in touch with the dean at the Alice Walton College of Medicine, otherwise known as Walmart, the dean at the Bernie Tyson School of Medicine, the faculty at NSU Medical School in Plantation, Florida. I mean, these are new, unencumbered medical schools doing their damnedest to say, we're going to be different. We're going to carve out stuff in the curriculum. And here's my analogy. And I'm not impugning any schools, for heaven's sake. I know there'll be blowback. That's not my goal. My goal is to say, hey, are we building the leader for tomorrow? And I'll let the audience drive their own conclusion here. There are medical schools whose mission is to build the researchers of the future. We all know who those are. There are other medical schools to build the community clinician of the future. Great. And I'm about, let's build the scholars and leaders in quality and in population health for the future. And I would argue that is still not a popularly held, widely disseminated view. That's all. I'm not deprecating anybody. In my old age, I get it. Social change, have we reached the tipping point, the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point here to change UME and GME? Well, some places we have. Is it a national movement that we got to have a different kind of doctor for the future? Well, look, if Mehmet Oz could be the head of CMS, anything is possible. But but are we building the right kind of doctor for the future is an open question, in my opinion. And I'm interested in feedback from everybody, what they think about this. I talk to med school deans on a regular basis across the country, good, bad, and the ugly. I'm not on the LCME. I have no official role. This is all influence and key opinion leadership via the book. The book stimulated a lot of discussion, most of it good, about, especially the last few chapters, are we building the leader of tomorrow to prepare us for the next pandemic and what all of its implications? And I would say not really.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to argue with you on this one
Yes.
because I think, we talked about this many times in the show, and I think still medical school curricula still are primarily diagnosis and treatment
Yes.
oriented and not, we don't teach about the continuum of
That's right,
disease.
John.
And I think if you don't teach that, you're never going to get it.
Medical education, Esther is an internist, my wife. Of our three children, we have one daughter who's very successful hospitalist and director of a medicine residency program. But her education looked a lot like her mom and dad's. Sure, she never wrote a note. Sure, she never slept overnight in the hospital and worked all the next day. Right? But anatomy's anatomy, biochemistry, it all looked pretty much the same. Yes, they had small groups, but there was very little quality and safety. But what made her experience better than the average bear was, well, she learned about David Mayer at MedStar and his summer camp in quality and safety. Wow, that opened doors. And so there's pockets of progress. And, again, are we at the tipping point to create the doctor of the future? I would say at this moment, no.
Yeah. First of all, Dave, this has been fascinating. And I guess as I listened to this and learned a little bit more about you, I want to first congratulate you for really bridging the gap between academic theory and actual practice. I mean, that to me is really impressive. And now that I've heard your story a little bit more, I understand your statement, start young in academics and outgrow your enemies. I thought that was a great quote. So listen, we're going to wrap it up here. We have a tradition at the MTVA Unscripted to ask our guests this question. Put on your visionary cap, especially now with the change in administration and obviously perhaps a different approach. Where do you think we're going with outcomes measurements and reimbursement models and pop health? Where do you think we'll be? I used to say 5 years, but maybe even just 3 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, of course, there's no future in predicting the future.
Who said that? That sounds like a Yogi Berraism. I love that.
Yeah. But good that let's do a 3-year, not a 5-year.
Yeah.
So I'll go out on a limb, why not? And I hope I'm around to see it too. I got to add that caveat now every time I think about the future. Look, I think whatever party you're in, and I get it, America voiced its clear opinion. Healthcare was not a presidential election issue, which is remarkable. So let's just give the facts and then I'll give my prediction. So here are the facts. We're the largest industry in America. Nothing comes close. The military industrial complex is 7% of the GDP. We're 3x of that. Okay. So if you mess with America's community hospitals, you're messing with the largest employer in town, source of civic pride. What really makes America great is the healthcare engine. There are 40 to 50 healthcare companies in the Fortune 500. You want to mess with that? You can't. So look, we're such a cornerstone part of the economy. That's the facts. Now comes the pathetic reality. With $4 trillion a year, we've lost our true north, and no one could convince me that we're improving the health of the population.
Amen.
That is the sad, sinful, pathetic, greedy reality.
Yep.
So my wish for the next, 3 years, get back, find that true north, and work hard. like MTVA, redirect, realign the economic incentives and drive improvement in outcome. And, it all comes down to what we talked about 15 years ago. We copyrighted it. No outcome, no income. That's what we got to strive for.
Yeah.
And if we could achieve even a modest approach to that in the next 3 years, I mean, I'm all for it. Bring it on. If RFK and Mehmet could do it, God bless them. I'll work with anybody who's aligned with the no outcome, no income theory.
Beautiful.
And to me, that's what it's all about. The greed that I see, the salaries, the lack of health improvement. Sure, places I get it. I'm not impugning any single organization. I love Jefferson. I've made my whole life there. That's not the issue. The issue is, taken as a whole, how can we say that our industry is improving health?
Yeah.
The facts don't support it.
Yeah.
That's the tough reality.
Well, I think that's a great, in some way sad, but true way to end. And I think, you bring me back to your book. I think in the forward, actually, by our mutual friend, Stephen Klasko,
Yes,
where he talked about the stuff he's learned at Davos at the World Economic Forum. And he says, where the banker told him, your industry, healthcare, is the last industry on the planet where consumerism hasn't changed the paradigm, right? So,
among other changes, consolidation, reorganization, impact of AI. I mean, it's a long list.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful that I'm still got gas in the tank. I'm still able to talk with smart people like you three. People care about the book. We did 3 printings. There's more interest. I'm very, very grateful to be healthy and still being part of the conversation. To me, it's the people and the legacies to the students, as we said earlier. That's really what's important to me more than anything.
So our listeners, I would strongly urge everyone to read the book, which really should just be called A Guide to Fixing American Healthcare. And the COVID is really kind of the subtext. But thank you once again so much. And honestly, incredible career. And Steve and I have also been influenced, I'm sure Laura has too, by these individual moments in time, and also key people in our lives that have helped formulate who we are. And so people don't talk about enough.
Isn't it interesting to look back and you say, how the hell did I do that?
Yes, totally. Yeah.
I didn't do anything compared to what you did, but
no. Yeah, I think about it a lot. Yeah.
Crazy.
You just have your head down and
I'm sure it took a lot of personal sacrifice for you and your family, but we won't talk about that now. But we know we've all been there.
I was home for dinner as much as possible, and that's a really important message. You don't get a second chance at that ever.
That's for sure. But thank you so much for joining us. Laura and Steve, as always, thank you. And I wish you all a great day.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Dave.
We want to take a minute now to introduce the new MTVA membership program. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we rely on support from our grassroots network to advance our mission of creating a value-based health system with high-quality patient outcomes at a reasonable cost. As we continue to grow and broaden our impact, we're excited to invite like-minded organizations and individuals to join our membership program. We're proud to offer 2 membership models, Ally Member and Trade Member. Tax-deductible membership contributions help us enrich the healthcare environment with quality content, including this podcast, and robust platforms to fuel discussion, collaboration, and advocacy that lead to groundbreaking solutions. For more information, including a full list of benefits offered, visit our website at www.movingtovalue.org/trade-member. The link is also in the episode description. Thanks again for listening and for being part of this important movement.